Jenifer Wofford. I just wanted to put in a plug for her website here, wafflehouse.com, so you can find it. That's what it's called. I love that. This is her Instagram. But Jenifer Wofford has just been such a pleasure to work with as we've been preparing for this workshop. She was born in San Francisco and raised in Hong Kong, Dubai, and Kuala Lumpur. Her family returned to California when she was a teenager. And fun fact that we learned while we were preparing with her, she was a spelling bee champ during those teenage years. Yep. Jenifer earned her BFA from the San Francisco Art Institute and her MFA from UC Berkeley. Her work plays with notions of hybridity, authenticity, and global culture, with a great sense of humor woven throughout. And I've so enjoyed her humor all the times we've chatted. She's also 1/3 of the Filipino-American artist trio MOB, or Mail Order Brides, which is an ironic name. Her art has been displayed at the Berkeley Art Museum, Oakland Museum of California, New Image Art in Los Angeles, the Wing Luke Museum in Seattle, the DePaul Museum in Chicago, and in galleries in the Philippines, Malaysia, and Hong Kong. And what I love also about her is that she's a fantastic teacher. She's part-time faculty in fine arts and Philippine studies at the University of San Francisco. She's also taught at UC Berkeley, Mills College, the San Francisco Art Institute, California College of the Arts, and San Francisco State University. Her students love her, and if you do go to her website and click on the teaching tab, you'll find this amazing student evaluation. I'm just so impressed. I've never had a student write this much about me. I think that's awesome. And there's this cute memento from a student. Is this something a student made for you, Jenifer? Yeah,
yes.
So anyway, that says something. When your kids or your students make something like that for you, that says we're in for a treat. So I'm going to stop sharing now and hand things over to Jenifer Wofford. Thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thanks for having me here. I'm going to get into it in just a second with you guys, but hey, Margaret, I just wanted a quick time check on how long you want me to set aside for Q&A.
Like maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. Because I've got about 10 or 15 minutes set aside for the little exercise. So if everybody has paper and pencil handy, that would be great for the latter part of what I'm sharing with you, but just making sure that I compress time accordingly to allow for that. So let me set myself up for that real quick. Okay. Hi. I found myself getting a little nervous for this presentation because you guys are all my people. And so often, you know, any of us as educators, when we're giving talks, it is one thing when we're talking to students, and we're all super accountable for that, but when it's a bunch of fellow educators, different story altogether. So anyway, really happy that you're here, really appreciate that, especially at this point in the semester, when you could be doing a lot of other things like just, drinking yourself to sleep and crying a lot. You are here, you are awake at the end of the semester or the closing of the semester for, the college folks. Yeah, just appreciate you being here. So what I'm going to do as I rip through these slides is talk through the process that actually precedes pattern recognition to some extent, because I think that understanding anybody's creative process can help as far as other ways that you might leverage today's workshop into ways that you speak to students about their practice. Yeah, and I think I have to, even though my work is rarely autobiographical, I do need to walk you through a little bit of my weird backstory, which it looks like, Michelle, you share with me, regarding kind of growing up a lot of different places, which is why I tend to synthesize ideas in my work the way that I do. So let me get the party started on the slides here, and I'm set up for share screen. Yes, I am. Okay, and let me just make sure audio is, okay, we already checked the audio, so we're good. Okay, hi, this is me. That's Wofford, as in like offered or proffered or a number of other things. And that is why my website is called wafflehouse.com. So this is me. Here, I'll pose similarly. And I always start lectures, it doesn't even matter the circumstances, but I always start out by making mention of my mentor, Carlos Villa, who some of you who know your Bay Area Asian American art history will know. Carlos, for me, was somebody who really embodied these, this ethos of, you teach and you make, and that they're inextricable from one another. and that your role as an artist is not just to, make the things in your studio and just, share them in a gallery and present them to the world, ta-da. That your role is really one of being in community with others. There is no separation between the process of making and the process of teaching, that you are as much an activist and a street scholar and just a connector. And so I always take a minute to keep it real, to center myself by just making mention of him. Side note, he does come up in the mural too. So there's a number of different reasons that I wanted to mention him up front. Also, because the Asian Art Museum will be doing an exhibition about him next year. It was supposed to open, Margaret, I don't remember, was it supposed to open early in 2022 and it's been pushed back?
It was actually supposed to, open later this year by the end of this year,
Right.
but it had to be pushed out because of the pandemic and all our exhibitions having to move around, unfortunately. Yeah.
So when that show opens up, that's going to be pretty extraordinary because, it does encapsulate Carlos's studio work in many ways, but also a lot of mention will be made of just the other kinds of community practices that he was involved with, much like some of the other artists in my mural. And specifically his Worlds in Collision project, which was arguably one of the earliest projects in the Bay Area that really looked at multiculturalism and diversity in the arts. And that is the course that I took when I was a young undergrad at the San Francisco Art Institute that really turned things around for me and my understanding of my role as an artist. So we're going to keep pushing from there. So we're starting with the origin story, and that is a very small version of myself sitting at a table. I think this is in Hong Kong, making some sort of art. I did not intend to become a visual artist at age 5 or 6 or whatever I'm here, but I do think that this combination of having support in expressing myself creatively, but also moving a lot in extremely I guess, unusual ways, not just to another town, but to another country, I think has made me make the choices that I do as an artist. And so those moving boxes on the right are, I think, us moving into our house in Dubai. Yes. So also of the various places I grew up, I turned 2 in a hotel in Hong Kong. And I did not live like many foreigners do in Hong Kong in some high-rise apartment on Hong Kong Island. I grew up kind of deep in the New Territories in Chuen Wan. And because my father was managing this oil terminal, we lived in the back of this oil depot. So I think you can see my cursor hovering, and there's some buildings on a hill that have been demolished since. So I was growing up in Hong Kong, but I was also growing up in the back of an oil terminal in front of a very, very, very large cemetery, also to the side of a slaughterhouse. So there were a few different things going on in this particular part of my childhood that made for like some very interesting ghosts in our house, I'll say that, but also the things that continue to underpin my logic as an artist. Also, you'll notice that I grew up as a mixed kid. My dad, big tall white guy, mom, super cute Filipino woman. And also just for side giggles here, I have got casts on my legs in this photo because I had broken both my legs on a trampoline. And so I was walking around like Frankenstein's monster for 6 weeks of my first grade year in this state. So I think this is also, these kinds of hapless moments in my life have contributed to my sense of humor in general. From Hong Kong, and I think the landscape of Hong Kong and the particular situation I grew up in there was very, very different once we moved to the Middle East. And so this was our side yard in Dubai. And so as you see Dubai in the media now, which is a very glitzy, almost Las Vegas-like place, at the time that I lived there in the late 70s, it was just beginning that process of development. And so, it was not an unusual sight to have camels kind of wandering through our side yard. We did not live in a gated community. Also, there's a lot of things that are very culturally inappropriate about the image on the right. And I think we might look at that image through a different lens now, but here we have this moment in which, my family had moved to the Middle East. We were really excited and curious about the local culture and probably did not think too deeply about whether it was appropriate or not for all of us to be wearing full male Arab dish dash in this particular moment. But that was our family Christmas photo, go figure. And I think one more of those moments that for me continues to shape why I look through culture, I think, in these ways where I look for points of connection. I don't ever presume to speak for a culture that is not my own. I think that's a really dangerous and slippery subject we can talk about later. But I do think about the ways in which we try to connect, and that these are the moments in my life that make that what it is. From Dubai, very different landscape when we moved to KL. And so this was our very lush street in Kuala Lumpur. We definitely lived in a nicer neighborhood. I think our house ended up becoming like an embassy of some sort later, which is, it was a small embassy, mind you, not a big embassy, but very, very lush, verdant place to live. Also the point at which I was entering my extremely awkward middle school growing pain years, but in many ways still a wonderful place to be for 5 years of my life. So from here, I should also mention that being born in San Francisco, having California roots, we would come back to the US most summer vacations. And I went to American schools overseas. So I grew up with a lot of the privileges and associations of a Western culture. And so it really is this wild conflation of many things in my life that led to us moving back to California, where I'm not even going to give you most of the pictures of growing up in Walnut Creek because it kind of stunk, to be real. But I moved back to the Bay Area right before I turned 14. So what you're getting right here is a picture of Sun Valley Mall in Concord on the left, and me working in the mall at Sun Valley Mall at the 1 Hour Photo Lab, which was next to the Emporium Capwells and across from the Cinnabon and the GNC, and also the Celix formal wear store. So many, many things colliding in my life in these ways. And what I will say is that moving back to the Bay Area in the mid 80s, all of these kinds of landscapes are accumulating inside of me, whether I realized it or not at the time. And as I look back in hindsight to this particular moment in the Bay Area, I really think about how much of the most recent body of work, even pattern recognition, is related to this particular moment. Who knows what this moment is, gang?
Earthquake. I remember that moment.
Earthquake, yeah.
Oh yeah. So interesting. And so this is the, oh my God, I'm having a brain fart, you guys. This is the freeway that collapsed in Oakland.
Was it the Nimitz Freeway?
Yeah, this is the Nimitz. So 1989 in general was a wild year globally, right? From the fall of the Berlin Wall, which is Tiananmen Square. There are a number of different things that I have looked back on as these particularly pivotal moments of rupture, just globally, but then of course also locally. And for any of us who've lived in the Bay Area for any length of time, I can now look back and think about how many things this particularly dramatic moment of rupture created here in the Bay Area. What other kinds of infrastructural things were going on. A lot of things were happening in this moment. And so I think around 2014, I became particularly consumed with what this quake had done for us or not done for us in the Bay Area. And so I started doing these illustrations on a very, very personal level. What I did was I asked people to tell me their stories, their memories of the '89 quake, just short form. And I would try to illustrate them because, right, in 1989, in the middle of this earthquake, people weren't Instagramming this stuff. They were just running like hell or ducking under tables or whatever. So most of us have these intense and very strange and subjective just relationships to that moment and its aftermath. So I was very curious about this. So I ended up building this web project, which is still live. I think it's a little janky at the moment, to be real. I'm going to have to rebuild a few things. But it's called Earthquake Weather. Because again, for any of us who've lived around the Bay, this was like this nonsense phrase that everybody used to say, oh yeah, it's earthquake weather, which meant it was a hot, dry day because that was the weather that day. And so if you go to 1989quake.com, you'll see stories of people's memories of the day of the quake. So for example, this person who's a friend of mine actually was a courier at the time, and he had just been on the Nimitz freeway just a few minutes before it collapsed. Felt it swaying a little bit on the rest of his drive home, got home, turned on the TV, saw that it had collapsed, and basically just his knees buckled and he felt sick because he realized how close to death he really was that day. Other ones were slightly less dramatic. Another man was just in the tiny little upstairs nook of Green Apple Books on Clement Street. And when it started shaking, he just ran like hell out of there. Another man who submitted a story was on the Bay Bridge when the Bay Bridge collapsed. And his most vivid memory of that moment was just of a man running with a child in a pink and white blanket. And again, so I'm just trying to, from that part of my practice that involves illustration, I was just trying to figure out how to make images of these memories. And so there was a lot of just searching for whatever reference I could find in terms of period cars, for example, or pictures from the aftermath on the bridge. So trying to combine things in ways that would bring that moment back to life. So anyway, went really deep into a hole in 2014, leading up to the 25th anniversary of the quake with this community project, right? Of just people sharing their stories and me trying to illustrate as many of them as I could. But that just really set me on an obsession with earthquakes in general. And that led to a series of paintings for a solo show I had called Collapse, where again, around this time, 2014, 2015, I was maybe not interested in just the Loma Prieta earthquake anymore, but I was interested in these moments of cultural or societal rupture in other places. So I looked at very specific reference photos from various quakes around the world and made paintings of these. And so these are, I don't know, smallish, 2x3, 3x4 feet, acrylic on canvas. I also have never been a landscape painter or much of a painter, to be real, you guys. So these were interesting challenges for me to try to take on as an artist. I think around this time, I was also reading this book called The Shallows, and I was also reading this other book called Collapse. The Shallows is really about how the internet has broken our brains, as we all know very well. And so I was thinking about cognitive collapse. And then Collapse, which I think was Jared Diamond, is really looking at societal collapse. And so these paintings were not necessarily just of literal earthquakes and moments in history, but really they worked for me as these metaphors, these operating premises for these other ideas that I was particularly haunted by at the time. So this led to a solo show at a gallery in Manila. And I think the practice or the experience of showing these works in conversation with one another in an almost installation-like space got me thinking spatially again about how this work might function. And I should also side note, when I was at the San Francisco Art Institute as an undergrad, I was a sculpture major and very quickly became interdisciplinary as one does. But I do think that moments of trying to transform an idea into a physical space as something that comes and goes with my practice pretty regularly. So anyway, logically, this is what leads us to Club Rupture, which is the aesthetic that is going to take us into the pattern recognition project in just a few slides from now. So by 2019, now we're looking at the 30th anniversary of the earthquake. I wanted to come back to this moment because again, as we're all aging, these things get forgotten, and the folks who have, younger folks or folks who have moved to the Bay Area more recently don't maybe have the same relationship to that moment of change and rupture. So I thought for the anniversary, I would do this ridiculous project in a very, very small gallery in San Francisco, where I built this, this very colorful set and made some videos within the set. So I appointed myself the host of a television dance party called Club Rupture, as one does, and put together with the friend who's in the back there with the checkerboard shirt. She put together a team of dancers who would basically be performing on this TV dance party. So some of you, from wherever you are, right, there was always some cable access or some regional television dance party. There were the bigger ones like, what is it, Soul Train, or oh my God, I'm forgetting the biggest one, you know, Casey Kasem.
Was it American Bandstand?
Yes, thank you, right? So these shows have this long history in America. But in the Bay Area, right, we had the Coffee TV Dance Party, which was also the KTZO TV Dance Party. And I wanted to capture this particularly weird retro moment of that as a way of looking at the earthquake. So the dancers performed a top 10 countdown in this tiny little gallery that I had, or this tiny little set piece that I had built within a gallery. And basically the 10 songs counted down to the moment of the earthquake itself, at which point you realize that the set that you're in is the earthquake. So getting kind of meta there, but here's a small clip from it. Hopefully the audio is going to work. You're watching Club Rupture. We'll be right back after these messages. this is basically the set. So what may or may not be apparent in this photo is that the gallery itself is only about 3 feet wider than the set that I built within it. So you kind of had to wedge yourself around the corner of this this open structure that I had built that was kind of collapsing and breaking apart to reveal in the center there, you can see basically the epicenter of the quake and some crack marks. What I had also done as leading up to this process, to this installation, was I was looking at a lot of just 80s, or mid-late 80s design, most specifically the Italian collaborative group Memphis, and their particular aesthetic. And I was trying to figure out how to translate this, to me, a very quintessentially 80s vocabulary into this other space. And so you can, if you have already seen pattern recognition, you will see the DNA at work here. What I also had realized is that you may have noticed that this doesn't look anything like the other work I showed you earlier. Man, it is really fun just to work with big dumb shapes and colors. And so that was just a level of sheer joy and pleasure that I had not experienced in my work for a hot minute. And so I really enjoyed that as well. So I really wanted to keep working with this aesthetic. Wedged into one other corner of the gallery was this old school CRT monitor, which showed the Club Rupture TV dance party video. And all the fragments that I had cut apart as I was building the room were just stacked on the wall to the side there. And what you see on the wall flanking the video are 2 small paintings, which is actually where the project began, which was that I didn't necessarily know whether I was making an installation yet, but I had started making these paintings. And the little inset boxes there are related to this amazing comic, which happened to be from 1989, called Here by Richard McGuire. And then the speech bubbles had little call outs to what's known as navigation code. And so I was very interested in that as a cryptic way to handle what a speech bubble expresses without necessarily giving anything away too much. So essentially, around the time that I was doing Club Rupture, the Asian Art Museum, and Abby Chen specifically, said, hey, I'm soliciting proposals for a mural on what's going to be our new Lawrence and Goretti Louis Hyde Street art wall. What would you like to propose? And because of just where my brain was at the time, I said, well, why don't we do Club Rupture, but we're going to make it Asian. And so this is why I kind of have to take you through all these steps to get us to the mural, because I was really interested in this idea of some of the formal structures of Club Rupture, which was these vertical panels broken up by fragmentation with some degree of a sensitive epicenter of rippling effects that were moving out from the space. And so I submitted this to the museum, and the museum said, all right, do it. And so this is basically an early mock-up that I had done to continue to visualize how that this mural might hold space in a different way. So the process for developing this really did start with, I'm a small paper person, you guys. I'm always doing little things in sketchbooks first or random scraps of paper before I get into the bigger, more theatrical scale of things. So I was spending a lot of time with that book that you see in the left called Asian American Art, A History. My friend Mark Johnson was one of the authors of that book. And so as I was trying to figure out how I wanted to include Asian American artists in this particular mural, certainly I knew a number of them already, but I also am not a scholar or an art historian on the subject. And I was for sure aware that there was an earlier generation of Asian American artists that did not really get their due to the extent that I think they deserved. And so Mark was my point man on sifting through what names might be included in the mural, because I definitely knew I wanted to include speech bubbles and with these little shout outs with artists' names in them, in addition to other kinds of patterns and textures that I was developing. From there, the small paper got slightly bigger, and I started working through little painted drafts to start to figure out how this all might link together. I knew that I was going to be working on 9, large panels that all wedged together into this very wide mural space. And so this was a nice way of working with components where I could move these around and decide what went well where. From there, then there began more of a research process of, I don't know, being a magpie. Is being a magpie kind of a research process? Let's hope so. Because it was a lot of just hunting and accumulating and hoarding images in folders on my desktop. I did work with a couple of young women who were former students of mine as my research assistants and studio assistants as we started looking for imagery. I think the majority of the images I felt like I needed to choose or at least vet before we developed them into patterns. But we started with this process of just like grabbing a lot of different things, making sure that we knew the provenance of the images and that it was culturally appropriate to utilize these or stylize these in a different way. From there, it was a lot, again, the small paper got bigger and there was just a wild process of just making lots of variations, color combinations. So you'll notice, for example, there's this thing that looks like blue avocados here. It became sort of orange avocados over here. And so we really just tried out color combinations and scale experiments just to see what might work in this mural. And just more of the same. And I should also point out my studio is really, really tiny, so it's really kind of hilarious to have these extremely big festive patterns coming at me. There was no escaping them for quite a while. I'm still trapped in them, as you can see from my Zoom background. And I did make mention of my assistants because while, yes, certainly I was painting a lot of this thing as part of a collaborative process. I think it's really important to name your collaborators. I think artists always do their collaborators justice or their assistants justice. So my primary henchwoman was Megan Bedelia here, who had recently graduated from USF. She'd been a student of mine, young Filipino-American graphic designer. Because she was a graphic designer, her expertise was really, really important to me at times where I needed to think through things. And so it was such a fun process to work with Megan on this. Also Jun Dao, who was another recent student of mine. And I think recent is important. Like if there's any potential for somebody still being a student, I think there's some real ethical boundaries there that I'm not comfortable with. So they have to be well and graduated before I'm gonna work with them in this capacity. But because June is Vietnamese, when we were developing like some of the patterns for the Cham or the Hmong people, she could read through texts online that I couldn't. And she could ascertain some of the nuances far better than I would be able to. And so I just felt that it was really fun to go through this with both of these two young women, to mentor them in one way, give them other opportunities to work and collaborate and research. And so this photo was taken probably, I don't know, clearly pre-COVID, but I'm thinking probably January 2020, because this mural happened in a fairly compressed amount of time. And so what all this process led to is, of course, what we're really here for, which is, the big show, the full mural. And so pattern recognition, 7 feet high, 38 feet wide, 9 panels, as I mentioned, with each panel has the name of a Bay Area Asian American artist. That artist had to be born before 1940. Some of that was just practically speaking, like, first of all, that earlier generation didn't get as much recognition, but second of all, within the span of probably about 10 years, there was this profound and exciting proliferation of Asian American artists in the Bay Area. And God, it would have been a lot harder to select from that pool of names just to be super real. Like I could add like a dozen more names to this easily right now if this were a different mural, or if I'm allowed to do another one. And then the patterns that were chosen for this were culled from several sources. They were adapted versions of iconography from those artists. There were images that were taken from the Asian Art Museum's collection. And then perhaps most pointedly, it was also about honoring and naming cultural or creative traditions from Asian communities outside the museum's collection, because there are some blind spots in the museum's collection. You guys are doing great though, you're on it. I know you're fixing it. Let's see, so here's a close-up of the left half. Where you can see how things interlock just a little bit. You'll see that there's a little bit of a Club Rupture-esque epicenter to the left-ish here. Originally, I thought there was going to be a single epicenter in this thing, just like Club Rupture, but that didn't actually make any sense. So let me tab back for a second. You'll notice that there's actually 3 ringed centers, and they basically ripple into each other and touch one another and move through each other. And there's the right-hand side. And so I know that the focus for today's workshop is on the 4 women who are included in this mural, but I hope that you all do your research and read up on the 5 male artists that are also in this mural. I did sort of take a moment to put good old Carlos Villa, my mentor, smack dab in center in that. And not just because he was my mentor, he did a lot of things for the community in broader capacities. And he felt very much like somebody whose ripples were connected to all these other ripples. And so here's an example of how I adapted one of his motifs for this mural. And so one of the side conversations we can have later is around how do we adapt other people's work or other cultural traditions, motifs appropriately into our work. And I think there is this way in which you remix something, you can quote from it, you should name your source for sure, but I think also stylizing it and adapting it so that it is not an exact replica, both contextually and stylistically from its source, is another helpful little trick. And so here's a close-up of one of the panels, specifically the Bernice Bing one, where you'll see that we quoted this cute little anthropomorphic-like figure in her mural, in her painting. And of course, she was a very expressive painter, and we did this thing that was much flatter and more design-based. It was a nice way to kind of give a little call out to her work. It was subtle, that wasn't quite so overt. You'll see over here that we adapted an Asian Art Museum screen. The bats that are in this mural are actually from a different Korean chest motif, but I didn't have enough space on this slide to mention that one. But yes, we have this screen motif from the Asian Art Museum collection there. And then that little black and white wedge, that little pizza slice towards the bottom there, was an adapted version of this Megamendong cloud pattern that is beautiful, beautiful. I think it's batik fabric that I've just been in love with for many, many years. And that was something that was not necessarily in the museum's collection. That was something that was just particularly compelling to me. On the Keisekamachi panel, you'll see in that upper right area in red on pink, a highly stylized and adapted version of one of her weaving pieces, like a nice, beautiful hanging scrim-like work of hers. Towards the lower, slightly left, you'll see what's called a boom pattern, and that was adapted very, very liberally because it's a very, very common motif in a lot of different ornamental design from Thailand, but trying to blow it up and out from a very, very different version of it and the Asian Art Museum's collection was the goal here. Also, there were just things that were very, very difficult, especially, side note, the Thai stuff in Cambodia and some of these incredibly gorgeous, intricate patterns were maybe actually too complex for this mural. And so there was just blood on the cutting room floor, you guys. There was a lot of stuff we had to cut because it was so beautiful, but it didn't actually work graphically. And then a very, very stylized version of a tapa cloth, which is from a number of different places throughout the South Pacific. You would see a lot of it from places like Papua New Guinea. This particular version was from Indonesia, so that is there. And here on the Ruth Asawa piece, you'll see how we adapted one of her tied wire sculptures into a flattened black and white motif. In the upper left, a very, very traditional Asanoha hemp leaf pattern. And then you'll also see these little beads called gogok beads, they go by a different name in Japan, but you'll see these throughout many centuries of Japanese and Korean culture. And with the Asanoha pattern up there in the upper left, this was probably one of the few places where I chose a pattern that might be instantly recognizable as a traditional Asian pattern. I was very deliberate about not choosing, I think, some of the most obvious patterns, but in some places it felt appropriate and it added a different kind of harmony to the composition. Here in the Jade Snow Wong panel, while the silhouettes of the ceramics in the treasure chest there, or the treasure wall, could be honestly any kind of ceramic. For me, it was very important that we were adapting versions of the ceramics that were in the Asian Art Museum collection. So even though those shapes may not be immediately trademark recognizable as a Jade Snow Wong, they absolutely were referencing her work, and very, very specifically. And then you'll see how we adapted this Tanalak weaving pattern in the lower left. And that is a weaving that comes out of some traditions that you don't want to play too fast and loose with. So I was very, very mindful of really stripping it down and modernizing it and changing it so that it did not presume to use the same cultural function. And then again, a flattened out, more wallpaper-like version of one of these lotus lamps that is in the Asian Art Museum collection. And look, I'm so happy the mural's finally up. Side note on this, we were writing along trying to finish this thing in, like, I think I started this thing on January 1st of 2020. We were powering it out through January and February, and March it was supposed to go up on the wall, and then guess what happened, gang? Yes. So screeching halt, stopped working on it for a few months, then finally realized that I really needed it out of my studio. So finished it up in April. The Asian Art Museum put it in storage for a little bit. And then finally it was installed in October. And this was a very, very happy day. We had a very impromptu, just quick email, some folks, show up if you want to. There's no official opening for this thing, but boy, howdy, was it nice to actually have friends and be in all together to celebrate this moment of the mural making its first debut. And so there you have the mural as it exists on the wall. Although this was when it was a little bit cleaner. It's gotten a little roughed up in recent weeks. But let's not stop there. A few more slides and then we'll move into a quick workshop exercise with you. But because I'm still pretty infatuated with this vocabulary, and I've really only done the Club Rupture project and the pattern recognition mural, I'm still really, I feel like, at an early stage of learning how to work with it. And so because of all the closed storefronts, there were some art groups who were sponsoring artists to do murals, temporary murals for them. And so this was a digital version that I did for a temporarily closed store in Chinatown. And Jiayou is, or Gaiyao, right, depending on how you're looking at this, is like a phrase of encouragement, right? It basically means add oil. And so the call out bubble in this piece was really about this idea of, you can do it, we can get through this. So that is that one. There's other subtle stuff that's also in the Asian Art Museum. It's like I repurposed some of the patterns from the Asian Art Museum mural, not all of them, but this little red floral pattern that you see over in the corners was very deliberately used, and that is an adapted version of the bauhinia, which is the the national flower of Hong Kong. And so that was a very subtle kind of pointed shout out to Hong Kong. And here's another view of it. And another view of it. This also led to a private commission for a client. So these are very small works on paper. Once again, working with some of the aspects of the Asian Art Museum patterns, but also adapting new ones. And since this particular client was associated with the museum, it felt very appropriate to reuse some of them. But as I'm working on this more, what's so fun about this, and which I hope you get for yourselves out of this workshop, is that any pattern can be imbued and repeated with a personal symbolism and repeated in varying kinds of ways like this. And so, yeah, well, I'll get back to that subject very shortly. And then there was this abandoned storefront right next to the sushi place in my neighborhood, and it was driving bananas because it kept getting tagged up so badly. And so I basically just approached my sushi friend neighbor's sushi zone and asked if they would be cool with me putting up a free mural next to their restaurant, and they said yes. And so I asked them what kinds of things could I put in the speech bubbles there. And so the phrasing was yokoso, right, which is welcome, and it's more of a broad way of saying welcome, because it was both a welcome to the street and not necessarily to the restaurant. And then the other little speech bubble here says Parudori, which is Pearl Street, which is the street that this mural is on. And so with this one, as I was working on it, all the ginkgo leaves on the street were falling. And so I thought that would be a very quick way to adapt a pattern here, was to create a ginkgo motif that would repeat. And so I think that takes us to workshopping. So basically, there's a lot of different ways that you can develop these kinds of pattern vocabularies. I did not invent patterns, big shocker. I did not invent colors either. These are things that everybody has access to and can use and repurpose and juxtapose in infinitely different ways. So hopefully everybody has a sheet of paper, pencil. Yeah, I can't really see, so I'm just gonna hope that you do. I'll give you a second to get to that.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah, I was going to say while people are gathering their materials, I loved learning about the epicenters in the mural because I hadn't thought about that, that there were epicenters within the mural and how people were rippling out their influences or their teachings were rippling out. So that was something I knew I learned today. Thank you, Jenifer.
I forgot to talk about it for a while there, actually. And today, because I think you had encouraged me to focus very specifically in this way, I realized that I actually had time to go into some of these things that I normally don't. You guys think I'm showing a lot of slides now. On an average 1 hour lecture, I'm powering through like 200 slides at like breakneck pace. Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, hopefully everybody's ready. I'm going to set a timer. But what you're going to be doing on your sheet of paper is you're going to be drawing at least 5 patterns or simple motifs, and then you're going to practice repeating them. And just for a quick overview, this is a good warm up you could do with your own students at any grade level, really. But you want to get them thinking about how they can repeat this thing, because there's what seems like a great idea the first time you draw a single object, and then there's what happens when you are actually subject to drawing that thing across a wide swath of a sheet of paper or a canvas or whatever it is you're using. So for our purposes, short form, you're probably gonna want to stick to pretty simple basic forms, but just practice repeating them. But for later, and the ways that you could adapt this for a different project, you could try to get your students thinking through what other more personal symbols could look like. And I'll get into that shortly. Or silhouettes from nature. Like I just showed you, like the ginkgo leaves that I adapted, just looked at something on the ground and figured, okay, let's put that in the mural. That's one option. And then other kinds of cultural symbols. And I'd say like stay away from really obvious stuff. I'm trying to think of things like the Nike swoosh logo, or like if you're talking about Christianity, does it need to be a cross? Is there a way to sort of acknowledge your faith without maybe going for like the really, really like obvious thing? And then just R&D, like research and development, and a longer, more protracted assignment. How could you get students doing the research and learning how to adapt something and repurpose thing and know what source they're citing very, very clearly and deliberately. Okay, so all that side note, because for 5 minutes, you're going to be doing something basically like this, which is spending about 30 or 60 seconds on each of these repeating motifs. It can be these if you don't want to think too hard about this, but you can do whatever you want to. But I'm setting a timer for 5 minutes, and I'll give you a count every 30 seconds so that you know to switch. I'm drawing 2. Okay, that's 30 seconds. You might consider switching. Okay, that's 60 seconds. It's a minute 30. You're at 2 minutes, so you should have at least 2 or 3 different patterns at this point. but definitely just continue practicing repetition. Two minutes and 30. Three minutes. So 2 more minutes to do this. So try to pick at least 2 different patterns for your final 2 minutes. Three 30. Four minutes, you have 1 minute left. Twenty seconds left. Ten, nine, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, stop. You probably learned by now which patterns were easy to repeat and which ones were a little bit more time consuming. And so again, if you think about adapting this with students, think about how much time you have for it, how much detail you want to get into. Okay, separate sheet of paper now. Pick one of these 2 things and you're going to spend only 30 seconds doing it. So don't overthink it. You're basically just creating a bunch of overlapping swirls or angled shapes over the whole sheet of paper. Okay, going to set a timer for 30 seconds and go. Ten seconds left. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, awesome. I'm sure it turned out beautiful. We're going to keep moving real fast here because guess what we're doing next? We're combining these 2 things. So deal is for the next 6-ish minutes, you're going to just start distributing those patterns into those shapes, right? So any place where there's a line, the pattern changes. You can also leave big areas open, and so you can space them out. So if you think about actually in pattern recognition of the mural, there's lots of areas that were just big flat color. It wasn't just pattern next to pattern next to pattern. So just start doing that for the next 6 minutes, which is filling in all those spots. We've got about 5 minutes left. You're 1 minute in. Got 3 minutes left. Confession, I just shaved a minute off of our time, you guys. We're doing 5 minutes instead of 6. Don't worry, you're gonna get an A. You have 2 minutes left. You have 1 minute left. $30. I'm gonna pull out of the slideshow for a second. You guys are gonna hold up your work. Ten more seconds. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's see what you got. Hold them up. Oh, it's not going to work on mine, is it? Yeah.
Look at all the colors. I love that people have time to color it.
Awesome. Good work, gang. All right, you're all getting A's. Like A pluses, not even A minuses. Yeah, great. Okay, so this is, like I wanted to say, this is the kind of exercise that you could adapt in a lot of different ways. So like as a 5 or 10 minute warm up with your students, this is one thing you could do. You could adapt the patterns to whatever is going on in your lesson plans. And if you're not an art teacher, these could be, objects from science or from math or for any subject, quite frankly. But this is an example of how it looks in a beginning drawing class at USF, which is, this is like a long, I think they're 2 or 3 week project where they have to work with pens. And there's some different kinds of guidance that go into this assignment, but I'm just saying that this is the kind of project that could look like a lot of different things at any grade level. And so I would suggest that you just think through how you are going to adapt this best for your students, right? Like how simple or how complex do you want this to be? Should this be an ink project? Could this be actually in a painting class? Could this be a good way to teach color theory? Because you could look at complementary colors or analogous or triadic or whatever. You could just do this with crayons or colored pencils. Could you build a stencil assignment around it? Could this be color paper collage, digital collage, which shout out to Pamela, that's coming up next. In a design class, how is this about iterative design or designing wallpapers? And then if you're looking at it in more of a humanities capacity, how are you looking through, symbolism or personal motifs? How are these icons or repeating motifs, symbols of history? How could this be a research assignment, right? On the contemporary artists or historic artists that use pattern repetition, or other just cultural histories with these traditions, like, because everybody does pattern. It's not a thing, like I said, that I invented. We all gravitate towards these kinds of things. And then, yeah, I think in an advanced class, how do you have a critical conversation around, the complexity of quoting from other people's cultural traditions, right? How can you have a conversation around where's the, the gray area and the slippery slope going to be dealt with as a student appropriates a symbol from a culture, whether it's their own, quote unquote, or another's. Like, where are the boundaries around that? So that becomes like a nice seminar discussion you could have. So just trying to give you tools to take this where you need to take it for your classroom situation. And I think that's it for slides now.
So right now what we're looking at is a web page of the pattern recognition activity packet. And you can see there's a PDF you can download right there. And this is an activity packet that you can do either before, during, or after of viewing pattern recognition. And in the activity packet, there are discussion questions to really explore the different elements that Jenifer Wofford just broke down for us very nicely. And also in the activity packet are activities, and there are 5. The first is to visit the Google Arts and Culture website on pattern recognition. And if you don't know what Google Arts and Culture is, it's a digital platform where museums and archives submit high resolution images of their collection for anyone to view for free. So if you aren't able to go in person to see pattern recognition, this is a good alternative, but definitely not the same as going in person, because you should all go in person. And the second activity is to explore the different lesson plans and activities that the school programs team and I created on each of the artists featured and called out in the mural. And you'll get a little preview of those activities later. The third is to really study and understand the origins of each pattern that Jenifer features in her mural, and also an opportunity to research the more traditional Asian designs that are not necessarily found in the Asian Art Museum. The fourth is a writing prompt about the speech bubbles. And last is the one that I want to feature, and hopefully we have a little time to see. But what Nicole was asking earlier is, how do you do a digital collaborative project? And I think Jamboard is a really good platform to do that. And for this activity, I basically took all the objects that Jenifer used in her mural that can be found in the museum and placed them all in a Jamboard for everyone to use. So hopefully you're seeing a Jamboard right now with Jenifer's space on it. And there's a title slide, some directions for you all, which I'll verbally show you, and art objects that you can find on the mural. And so with the next object, you'll have a blank space and you can move around the objects and place them however you want and rotate them and size them up and down. You can duplicate it, order it so that you can compose it however you want. It's into the back. And I'll just show you some examples of what people on my team created. so you can see the full depth of it. And what's nice about Jamboard is that you can bring outside images to it. So let's say you want to draw with the objects, you go ahead and do that. You can add your own speech bubbles with it and create like a mandala shape, as this person did. Layer the different objects on top of each other. And again, bring out outside images or patterns. And I brought this from the Oakland Chinatown sidewalks. And yeah, if we had time, I would encourage you all to collaborate and work on that. But as Jenifer mentioned, there's this idea of cultural appreciation versus appropriation. And we strategically put the collage last and hope that you would research more about the objects, get to know the origins and why Jenifer chose the objects to include, as well as chance to reflect what kind of patterns that you think that you would want to include that are personally important to you all.
Thanks.
So with the Jamboard, the only person that needs something in order to access it is the owner of the Jamboard, and you'll need a G Suite account, so like a Gmail, for instance. And then what you can do is just share the link with everyone so that they can all just come in and start collaborating with it. And again, you can rotate the pieces with the top left-hand corner. You can shrink it, enlarge it, and duplicate it, or even delete it. Let's say you don't want to use all the objects. And then the pen feature is right here on the left bar, and then the text right here. Oh, and this little image with the mountains, you can source outside images. So if you have an image in your computer, go ahead and use that. And with that being said, I'm going to share the link in the chat. And go ahead and just find a blank Jamboard. There are 15 in total blank spaces. So just find one and start playing around with it. And let me know if you have trouble accessing it.
Yeah, so I think we can take about 5 minutes on this, and that way if people have questions as they're trying to get into the Jamboard, we can help you learn how to use it, and that way you can play with it later and figure out how you could use this in class with your students.
Oh my God, this is so fun, you guys. I'm learning things at this workshop.
Yay!
Feel free to add your name too on the Jamboard slide so you can make sure that nobody else is messing with your pattern.
Yeah, and again, in the chat, if you want to use this Jamboard, really only the teacher or you need to have a G Suite, so like a Gmail account to use it. And then anyone in the world can use it.
How do you duplicate an image again?
So on the top, so select the image that you want. So you have a blue box highlighting it. There will be 3 dots on the top right-hand corner. When you select the 3 dots, there should be an option that says duplicate or duplicate.
I do see just collaborative art going on page number 5. Several folks are pattern recognizing together.
And again, I just want to say, feel free to include text in your collage, and maybe do a shout out to someone or something. And feel free to add your own images too.
I'm also going to put in the chat the link to the activity packet. So the website that Pamela showed you that has all the discussion questions and other ideas for activities. The link is now in the chat.
And how do you add your own active image?
Yeah, so on the far left-hand side, there should be a sidebar. And then I think towards the middle, there's a black box with mountains in it. You go ahead and select that. And then there's the option to upload images from your computer or just search from the internet. Yeah, so you can add pages as you go. So right now there are 20, and 20 is the max number of pages you can have on a Jamboard. So if people are looking for more areas, I will delete the Jamboards. But yes, 20 is the max.
Thank you. This
Thank
was
you
fun.
so much, Pamela. So as Pamela mentioned, we actually have created teacher packets or activity and background packets on each of the artists featured on pattern recognition on Jenifer Wofford's mural. So real quick, I'm gonna share screen and show you where those packets are. So here's, can you see the web page with the activity packet right now? I'm gonna switch over to this web page, and I'm gonna put this link in the chat in a minute. But as you can see, we have teacher packets on all the highlighted artists. And in addition to learning about the patterns on the mural, the visual patterns, there are also patterns throughout these artists' lives. Like for instance, all 4 Japanese American artists in this list were all incarcerated during World War II. The 4 female artists, you know, in the list were all challenged in terms of whether they were seen as artists at first, right, or as fine artists. And there are lots of ways you could talk about those ripples that Jenifer was talking about, those epicenters, how some of them were teachers also, right? Who then their influence rippled out to support and help other young Asian American artists coming up. But for the next part of the workshop, our team is going to share an activity for each of the female artists that's on the mural. And we're going to start with Nina, who's going to talk about Bernice Bing.
Great, thank you so much. So I dropped a link in the chat for the web resource for Bernice Bing, but I'm gonna share my screen and get started on my presentation. So Bernice Bing, or lovingly known as Bingo, was an artist born in 1936. She passed in 1998, born in San Francisco, Chinatown. She was a Chinese American abstract expressionist. So her early life was really marked by adversity. She was orphaned. She was the daughter of an imprisoned person. She was queer, Chinese American, came from a lower socioeconomic status, and was also a transracial adoptee, frequently adopted by white families, and didn't have a lot of stability as she was moved around from foster homes. She also, in addition to these identities, she was also educated and able-bodied. She attended California College of Arts and Crafts, CCA now known, and received her MFA and SFAI at SFAI. So Jenifer Wofford and her have a connection, being SFAI alumni. So she was an abstract expressionist, but abstract expression was dominated by this New York-centric male field. And so we're going to change.
Uh-oh.
About that.
We move to another artist until Nina comes
Oh,
back.
I'm back. Sorry.
We're back. Great.
Thanks. Okay, so just a little background on abstract expressionism. It was a movement in American painting that came after World War II. And it really resists a cohesive style. It's very much about movement, about redefining what we see as traditional painting, like still lifes. Here are some examples of abstract expressionist artwork that you would know. A Jackson Pollock, a Franz Kline, a Joni Mitchell. And so it's known for breaking away from this traditional process. And Bernice Bing decided that she was going to use abstract expressionism to challenge middle-class white heteronormity. She used abstract expressionism to explore her identities. So I showed my group at the beginning some of her paintings, and I want to just take a look at these style, these feelings, these colors, these amazing brush strokes that kind of just like across the page, the different motifs and feelings emanate from this painting. It brings me like a deep sense of calm, but also this like rush of exhilaration looking at this. Here's another one. Bing really used oil painting and some monoprinting techniques in her work. But just looking at this juxtaposition of these really sharp lines in the center here, and as it fades out, we get this gradient and this like smudged look of the palette and the tones on top of one another. So Bing was a really well-respected figure in the San Francisco Bay Area arts community, kind of neighboring the beatnik movement, you know, creating these phenomenal paintings. But her work has been left out of the narrative. And I'm not okay with that anymore. So we have this lovely quote from Sumaira on an artsy article. It is, of course, unsurprising that the work of a Chinese American and lesbian artist would fall through the cracks of history. So I want to introduce an intersectionality framework. Intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who's a legal scholar, and it refers to a framework that views people through the intersection of all of their different identities. Sexual orientation, your culture, your geography, right? And it results in this really unique experience of being oppressed and having privilege on a number of different scales, and how we exist in the center of this framework, everything colliding and dividing here. So this is opposed to an alternate model that views people just as the sum of their social identities. We want to take a look at social identities all encompassing. So one of the lesson plans that I have created is to introduce intersectionality through the lens of Bernice Bing in your art classrooms or your social studies classrooms or wherever you are, and take a look at this identity wheel. We have many different identities that exist on a privilege and an oppression scale. If you're educated, if you're able-bodied, if you're heterosexual, we have colorism here, fertility, have your language, if you're an English language learner, or how you exist and appear, male, genderism. So in the link that I dropped in the chat at the beginning, there is a packet for Bernice Bing that talks about identity, intersectionality. So there are included in the packet are lots of great video resources for you to share with your kids, anywhere from elementary school all the way up to high school, college, and beyond. And attached are some discussion questions, a brief biography of Bernice Bing, and ways that you could introduce the abstract expressionist work into your classroom. Thank you. And I'm happy to share resources at the end of this if you are interested in more.
Thanks so much, Nina. So Jenifer's next, who's going to share a lesson on Ruth Asawa.
Thank you. I'm just going to do a couple of things here and just double check that we're all set. We're all set. So we have a lesson plan around Ruth Asawa that goes through grades elementary all the way through high school. And I'm just going to highlight one outline specifically, and it's the craft and design versus fine art, and it's really a gendered lens. So just to give a brief introduction, who Ruth Asawa is, a lot of her work is really well known, but she was a prominent sculptor, a public artist, and she was absolutely a tireless arts education advocate. She was incarcerated at War Relocation Center in Arkansas, and while she was there, she graduated high school, and she specifically, and maybe unsurprisingly, excelled in her art classes. While she faced discrimination at the Milwaukee State Teachers College, Asawa transferred to Black Mountain College in North Carolina. She moved to the San Francisco Bay Area in 1950, and she started to become recognized for her wire sculpture. But beyond her artistic achievements, Ruth Asawa was a very committed arts advocate. She served on the San Francisco Arts Commission, the California Arts Council, and the National Crafts Planning Project for the National Endowments for the Arts. She was a co-founder for the Alvarado School's Arts Workshop and was deeply involved with the San Francisco School of the Arts, which was eventually changed and renamed after her. Asawa challenged conceptions of what it meant to be an Asian American, a mother, a fine artist, and a public arts advocate. In this lesson plan, our objective is the students will explore the gender divide between craft and art while also investigating Asawa's sculptural work. In 1956, Art News wrote the following statement around her work. These are domestic sculptures in a feminine handiwork mode. And I think that really says a lot. Much of Asawa's identity has been intertwined with her life as a mother and a homemaker. And throughout her career, her art was labeled as domestic. And therefore she was excluded from the fine art circles. I want to ask everybody here, when we think about art, what imagery comes to mind? Is it a famous painting or a sculpture? Or maybe a famous building? Can we get some shout outs? What comes to mind when you think art?
Children hardwired to make art.
Okay.
Big, thick, gold gilded frame.
Okay. Anybody else? What visualizations come to mind with the word art? It's free association.
Museums.
Museums.
Paintings.
A painting.
Color.
Color, good.
Fashion.
Fashion, that is a good one.
Expensive gallery spaces.
Yeah, maybe. White walls.
Yeah.
So what about a vase or a quilt or a violin? It's not so easy to determine, and yet we do it in an instant, and it's a judgment bias. So let's take a look at 4 sculptural styles that Asawa worked with. Here are 2 of them. These are both hanging works, one free hanging from the tip, and this one is a wall mount. But she worked more other than just wire sculpture, but physical sculptures, and even this sculpture is incredible. So another question for you is, what do you think when someone says the word craft?
Hobby.
Say that one more time.
Craft is a hobby.
Hobby.
Affordable materials.
Oh, good one.
Function.
Function.
Elmer's glue.
Textile.
Textile.
Handmade.
Handmade.
Personal.
Okay, personal. Mm-hmm.
Etsy.
Etsy. What would be the differences between craft and art?
For me, they overlap.
Mm-hmm.
Thing versus idea.
Okay.
Snobbery.
Snobbery. Maybe elitism.
Art would be more expensive.
Oh, that's a good call out. It's more expensive, yeah. We don't tend to have galleries around craft. So here is just sort of a comparison chart that we have in the teacher packet. And let's try to consider some of the following points. So Asawa's work aligned with domestic handcraft because it was weaving, which is usually a traditional craft technique rather than art. Is this view compounded by the fact that Asawa is a woman? And is her work denigrated because of the weaving association as being women's work? Here is a writing prompt that you can offer your students. What are the differences between art and craft today? How would we define such terms? And do these differences lead to a greater appreciation or understanding of the work today? To for older grades, for maybe high school up to college, we can consider a level of conversation is, are the arts and craft defined by their high and low cultural associations, the high art and low art? You could brainstorm culturally specific examples and consider how they are defined. Do art critics and museums promote different perceptions of art versus craft? And is this changing in the contemporary world? And why might that be? Another question is to encourage students to use examples to further elaborate on that. So this is just one example of our teacher packet that we have for around Ruth Asawa.
Thank you, Jenifer. I'm now going to share a lesson for Jade Snow Wong. So I'm going to share screen and show you first the packet. And I can put the link in the chat in a minute. But so this is the packet for Jade Snow Wong, and on page 15, so it's a big packet, lots of activities and background information. On page 15 is a lesson where you would use a movie that was made about Jade Snow Wong's life as not just a way to learn about Jade Snow Wong, but as a historical document in and of itself, because the movie was made in 1977, so post the civil rights era. And so the movie was trying to be very progressive and thoughtful about how there could be intercultural understanding. But at the same time, there are issues with the movie that we can talk about just from watching a brief clip together. And so this lesson in the packet gives you background information on the film, the link to the film, and some questions you can ask the kids, and then more in-depth discussion questions on important themes in the movie. So these are some of the themes that the film covers, but what I wanted to really talk about today was the film as a historical artifact or document in and of itself. So what was the purpose or agenda of this film? How factual do you think this film was? Does it elaborate on certain things versus others? Does it focus on, parts of her life that you wouldn't expect a movie like this to focus on? Does it reinforce any stereotypes? And what does this film tell you about the time in which it was made? And how might the film be different if it were made today? Okay, so I'm just keeping those questions in mind. I'm now gonna reshare screen to show you a clip from the video. And already you can see just from the thumbnail, for the video, this is, the actress who plays Jade Snow Wong as a child. This plays her older brother. And as Liz mentioned earlier, when we looked at Jade Snow Wong in our small breakout room, we talked about how she was the 5th daughter in this family of 8 children. And with an older brother who got all the attention and all the support of the parents, she had to find her own way to become an artist. So I'm just going to enlarge the screen and show you a clip from later when she is talking to a friend about her trouble trying to pay for her college education. So I'm just going to forward to the clip real quick.
It's just not fair.
Oh, don't tell me. You finally asked your father for college money?
Yes, and Joe, there's nothing for me, not a penny. It's all for older brother.
What do you say?
The usual things, the sons that carry on the family. Daughters get married and make sons for other families.
Hey, maybe you ought to promise that you'll never get married.
Joe, I don't blame him for not having much money. He's worked so hard, but when older brother went to college, Daddy sold sewing machines and borrowed money from the bank. For me, there's nothing. Why? I can't help it if I was born a girl. And even if I am a girl, supposing I don't want to get married just to raise sons, maybe I have a right to expect more from life than sons. Why won't the Chinese ever admit that women have minds and feelings too?
Look, since you won't drink your tea, here, have another flower. What are you going to do?
I'm going to get out my maid's uniform, and I'm going to work my way through college.
Although she won scholarships and was graduated from Mills College with honors, Phi Beta Kappa, that was only to be expected. All Wong children did well in school. Because she was awaiting another child, Mother couldn't come to the graduation ceremony. So Jade Snow came back home in her cap and gown and paraded for her. When Jade Snow was graduated in 1942, America was at war. Chinese sons went into the army, but fifth daughter did her part too. She became a secretary in a shipyard where they built freighters round the clock for the Navy. And so Jade Snow fought the battle of the typewriter. She was a secretary now, but with the habits of a scholar. So between business letters, she wrote a study of why man-hours were lost to the war effort at the shipyard, and had her first taste of the honor she'd always dreamed of. Jade Snow got to launch a ship. She won a statewide essay contest on the subject of absenteeism, and part of the prize was the honor of christening a new Liberty ship.
Miss Jade Snow Wong. And in honoring this young Chinese-American lady, we are honoring all our Chinese Americans who are contributing so much to the war effort. Over 200 of them are employed working stalwartly in this shipyard right now. And so it is fitting that this outstanding Chinese American should launch the William A. Jones, poised majestically on the waves, ready to carry 10,000 tons of headache to Tojo. Now, Ms. Wong, will you do the honor?
Thank you, Admiral Keller. First, I'd like to thank the American teachers who introduced me to a new language and to new ways of thinking. And I'd like to thank someone else. 40 years ago, my father came to this country as an immigrant. Starting from nothing, he built up his own business and reared 8 children to be good Chinese and good Americans. This honor that you give to me is really an honor to him and to my mother and to all the Wongs. Thank you. I christen thee the USS William A. Jones.
A picture of Jade Snow was on the front page of every newspaper in San Francisco. She was suddenly the talk of Chinatown.
All right, so I'll stop there. Let's talk about that clip briefly. You can, put comments in the chat or raise your hand to call out thoughts about that clip. So definitely the movie 1977 was trying to promote a celebration of Chinese American culture. This Chinese American figure, she wasn't just an artist, she was a writer. She wrote 2 books. They were autobiographical. But as the clip went on, did you notice things that today you wouldn't actually put that in a movie? So what are people's thoughts? Okay, so in the chat, Nicole says they're lauding her for her patriotism. Okay, so they kept emphasizing she was a good Chinese American, right? Working stoically. The Chinese Americans are working stoically for the war effort. And what was happening to the Japanese Americans during World War II, right? Why would that army official be lauding the Chinese Americans over other Asian groups at that time? There's something very fraught there. And in terms of the message the movie is promoting about Jade Snow Wong, does she fit the model minority stereotype? Nancy in the chat is saying, singling out the Chinese culture is only one that is patriarchal and sexist. So yes, there's a very judgmental view of Chinese culture in the movie, isn't there? Yes. And the model minority idea, how is that played out in that clip? And then I know we have to move on to Pamela's presentation. Yeah, Nicole mentions the binary of good versus bad minorities during World War II. The model minority myth being that Asians work hard, they succeed in ways that other minorities don't. That they are quiet, they don't cause trouble, they assimilate. Yeah, Ruby says very stoic, parents are hardworking and don't complain, academically successful. And she makes the front of the Chronicle. She's made it. It's the American dream. So yeah, the celebration of her dad during the speech over her mom, who was silent the whole time and throughout the movie is actually silent. Like you hear very little from her, and it's all about her father as the patriarch and making all the decisions about who gets the education, so on and so forth. War culture backgrounding her rise to recognition. Yes. So lots to talk about with your students about not just her life, because they don't even talk about her life as an artist in that movie. They focus on her becoming assimilated, actually. And so there's lots to unpack with your students about that. What does it mean to be a good Chinese American according to this movie? And was it filtered through the 1940s context and then the 1970s context? And how would this movie be different if it were made today? So anyway, I hope you check out the Jade Snow Wong packet. There are lots of other activities in there, but for now, I'd love for Pamela to present on Keiseki Machi.
Hello, I have to share my internet now with people, so you'll now have a disembodied voice presenting to you all. Hope that's okay. Let me go ahead and share the packet in the chat. So I'm going to present on the activity, Make Your Own Cardboard Loom. And this is the last activity you can find in the packet in hopes that you'll explore the other lessons before you get here to learn about Keiseki Machi. And in the previous lessons before the cardboard loom, you'll learn that her interest in art really began during World War II in incarceration camp. And in that lesson, you'll learn that she went to art classes pretty much every day taught by Chura Abata, which is another artist featured in Jenifer Wofford's mural, and also a very prominent Japanese American artist. And in those art classes, she learned how to fold origami, how to paint, which you can see on the top right-hand corner, and draw on the bottom right-hand corner. And just to explain what the two images on the left, that's basically her ID when she entered the incarceration camp. So after she was released, she immediately enrolled into the California College of the Arts, where she began studying weaving on a loom. And just as Jennifer Miller, who presented on Ruth Asawa, mentioned, creating textiles can be seen as more of a feminine craft because textiles are often associated with everyday items like clothing, blankets, home goods, and dismissed as an art form for not being innovative, the idea that it can be reproduced. But artists like Keiseki Machi and these, her artworks right in front of us, helps gain respect for weaving as an art form. So today, Sekemachi is best known for her three-dimensional sculptural forms that take inspiration from her Japanese heritage. And we can see that with, on the left image, the e-cop box, which looks a lot like an origami box. And on the right side, the woven book, Wave, you see the traditional Segaha pattern, which is that little wave in the front near you all. So after learning about Keiseki Machi's cultural heritage, her history as being a formerly incarcerated person, hopefully during those packets, students or you all are encouraged to also explore your own cultural heritage, your own family history or community history, and begin to express that through the same medium that Keiseki Machi is best known for. So as you can see here is the beginning of how to build your cardboard loom. And I was looking around my workspace and saying, I have so many cardboard boxes. What can I do that can relate to Keiseki Machi? So these are just cardboard boxes cut up. And as you can see, all you really need is a cardboard box, scissors, either tape or glue, and string. And on, let's see, on this weaving loom, you can see that I started creating this design. And at that time, I was, being stuck at home. I wanted to do something with my family because I'm staying with my family right now, and we began learning how to play mahjong. So this object is based on the sticks that you can see on the mahjong tile. Now, it's just one, but I'm hoping to do multiple soon. And an example of a finished product is down here, this little, honestly, 3 by 1 inch textile. And you can see here that this layout is, I was going to say similar, but it's not similar at all to Kei Sekimash's workspace, which you can find on the top right-hand corner. So I hope that if you're looking for a more hands-on activity, that you'll consider make your own cardboard loom. Thanks.
Thanks, Pamela. So we kind of zipped through, a bunch of highlighted activities from the packets, but if you take a look at all the packets, you'll see that they go in depth in providing biography on each artist, and also, to respond to something Nicole brought up in the chat, also does talk more about their art practice and their techniques. So thank you, everyone. And real quick, before we sign off, I just want to highlight what's coming up from our school programs for the summer for teachers. In June, we're doing a joint teacher workshop series with MOAD and with a group called Two Languages, One Community, which is a poetry collaborative. Michael War and Chun Yu are poets who write and translate each other's work. So Chun translates poems into Chinese so that there can be solidarity between the African American and the Asian American communities. And so 3 Tuesdays in June, 9:30 to 12 on each of those Tuesdays, we'll be working with MOAD and with the poets to bring you workshops on how to use art and placemaking as tools for learning and unlearning history. And so we'll have resources, activities, ideas similar to how we shared out today. And you can learn how culturally specific museums can support teachers implementing the recently approved California State Ethnic Studies curriculum. So lots of exciting stuff coming up. Let us know if you have any questions about that. Jennifer's the point person for all the logistical info on that. But I really want to thank my team, Jennifer, Nina, Pamela, for all the great work they put into this workshop and their excellent presentations. And thank you so much to Jenifer Wofford for your fun, informative, inspiring presentation and art. Like, I hadn't seen your earthquake paintings before, and I'm so moved by them. So thank you for everything. It was so much fun working with you, and I want to work with you again in the future. So thank you, everyone. Please keep in touch. You can email us, reach us. I think it's schools@asianart.org. Is that the email if they want to check in on anything, Jennifer, right? Okay. Thanks so much, everyone. We'll let you know when the recording for this is available, and check out our websites and all the web pages we put in the chat. And we hope to see you again at the museum in person, hopefully. Have a great rest of the weekend.